Let's bring in the Black Business Council President Elias Monage to give us a sense of the inauguration of the president, the ceremony, and of course what the world of business has to say about this. A very good evening to you. Thank you so much for your time. As a business community, I know that you've been watching with keen interest these developments and of course observing what has been going on and how that will impact business. What are some of the observations you've made?
I think evening to you and to the viewers at home. I think indeed we are watching this thing with keen interest because we want a bit as business so that we can then run the industries across the Republic. We can then talk about industrialization. We can then talk about rebuilding the economy, but we then require that stability from the political point of view. And I think today's presidential inauguration is one step towards attaining that stability. Safe to say, there are a number of things that they're still outstanding in terms of the configuration of cabinet, because that is a critical component, so that once that is then done and dusted, I guess it will be hands on deck, because we need to see how the economic cluster will then be configured. That's the first thing. And secondly, how other government departments or ministries will be configured in terms of appointment of people, whether we then look at the alignment of various ministries, so that, for example, if we then talk about the energy, is one of the critical areas that we're looking at in terms of providing energy efficiency in the country at a sustainable level, the base load and various other issues. We're also then looking at this thing with keen interest that the question of the unemployment needed to be sorted out like yesterday.
Yeah.
And I think these are some of the issues that in the next coming period, we are willing to engage government, and particularly the president, before he configures cabinet, so that we can then raise our concerns and how we want that cabinet to be configured, so that part of that consultation, it involves business in the main, to say how then do we see the configuration of a cabinet, how do we envisage the economic cluster, because where we are then saying we have a keen interest is around the transformatory agenda, changing the balance of changing the patterns of ownership. We want them to see.
If you'll allow me, just before you expand on that point, I mean, you speak about stability, of course, making mention that once the president has appointed a cabinet, we know that the next steps will now be formally setting out policies that should be aimed at rescuing the country's failing economy. You speak about your concerns around the economic cluster. And of course, we know that as you speak about that, we cannot ignore the ideological differences between the partnership, the DA and the ANC under the government of national unity. What are some of your concerns there?
But I think firstly, let's start with the public procurement. Remember, the public procurement bill went through the consultation process last year with the sixth administration, and it's for the president then to sign it into an act.
Yeah.
And I don't think that should be a subject matter for further negotiations by parties that they were part of the processes last year. So if the president signed that, it then settled the primary legislation in terms of procurement, where state must then procure, the empowering legislation to female-owned businesses, black-owned businesses, youth-owned businesses, people living with disability that they own different businesses, including professionals, so that the procurement is then clarified once and for all in terms of that primary legislation, which will be a public procurement act. And hence, I'm saying that bill must be signed like yesterday by the president. Now, the second part, it then deals with the configuration. The configuration for us is around the industrialization in the main. Industrialization, empowering of the previously disadvantaged individuals to say, how then do we forge ahead in industrializing the country? To what extent do we then deal with the redress of the imbalance of the past? Because the Constitution talks about it, and that's one of the critical areas around empowering legislation, a transformatory agenda that we're saying the economic cluster in the main, they need them to look at those issues to say, how then do we empower people? How then do we deal with that component of industrialization? How then do we deal with increase of penetration of black-owned businesses being listed at the Joburg Stock Exchange? How do we deal with the retail sector, the pharmaceutical, the financial services that continued for the past 30 years not to be transformed? And I'm saying those are some of the things that we are looking with keen interest. And I think the reason why I'm raising this point is because the president basically said today in his speech, all the parties, they didn't manage to attain a majority. So it then means all of them, they must work together. Working together, it then means they need then to reach compromises on various other issues. But in the main, we cannot then downplay the empowerment of our people in the country to say majority of the people still remains black and Africans. And as such, we need then to find a way of empowering them. We cannot have the youth that continue to graduate, but they're not being employed by anyone. Yes. They're not absorbed by industry. So we need them to have programs and projects as part of industrialization, as part of entrepreneurs and trade skills that individuals, they need them to be considered for that empowering. Remember, empowerment is not about only the question of ownership. It's to empower people then to do things differently. It's around, yes, ownership. It's around people running their own businesses, around empowering people, just not to be academic, but also then to become their own employers, to employ other people.
Just expanding on that, as you talk about people running their own businesses, we know that some of the challenges that come with running own businesses is around ESCOM, the structural constraints on the economy hindering growth, and the position around the energy mix with those within the Government of National Unity. Very quickly, what are your thoughts around that?
I think there are three things. Firstly, we need them to have sustainability of energy in the terms of the energy mix. And I think you will recall that government last year issued what is called Integrated Resource Plan. And that plan basically then talks about the plan on energy for the country to say we need them to talk about base loads in the form of coal, nuclear, gas, and hydro. And these are some of the things that we need them to forge ahead in addressing the critical question on the base load. That's first. The second thing is around access to market and funding. We need also then to deal with access to funding so that those individuals and businesses, they need then to have funding mechanisms that is then geared towards them gaining that access to funds. And the third part is the market accessibility, including even an element of market concentration. Because if we're not going to deal with those issues, it basically means that we're going to continue with the current trajectory where majority of the people, they continue to be excluded in the economic stream. And these are some of the things that we're then saying part of the empowerment program need then to address and deal with those issues from our side.
Very well. Thank you so much for weighing in on this discussion there. We leave it there for now with Elias Monage, the Black Business Council President, just giving business perspective following the President's inauguration.